Let me tell you something, and you better listen close, because this is the kind of thing that keeps a wise guy up at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering where it all went sideways. You ever stop and think about the exact second when a man goes from being your brother, your blood, someone you'd take a bullet for, to being the guy who's setting you up for the hit? That moment, that precise instant when loyalty flips into betrayal, it's like watching a coin spin in the air, and you never know which side it's going to land on until it's too late. For decades, and I mean decades of putting in the work, Salvatore Tessio stood shoulder to shoulder with the Corleone family. This wasn't some Johnny-come-lately, some associate trying to make his bones. No, no, no. This was a man who'd been there since the dirt roads and the tenement buildings, since before the money started flowing like wine at a wedding. But here's the thing that's going to twist your guts. When the moment arrived, when the universe put him to the test and asked him to prove everything he'd ever claimed to be, this man, this supposedly unshakable pillar of the organization, he made a choice so unforgivable that even now people whisper about it like it's some kind of curse. And let me set the record straight here, because everybody thinks they know why Tessio did what he did. They think it was about grabbing more territory, about stuffing his pockets with more cash, about climbing that ladder to sit in the big chair. But that ain't it. That ain't it at all. What drove Tessio to his destruction was something far more dangerous, something that eats at a man from the inside like a cancer you can't cut out. By the time you're done hearing this, you're going to understand exactly why the sharpest, most calculating hitman in the whole Godfather saga made the one mistake that cost him absolutely everything. Now let's go back to the beginning, back to when things made sense, and a man knew where he stood. Tessio wasn't just some soldier in the Corleone organization. This guy was one of the original architects, one of the founding fathers, if you want to get fancy about it. He'd been around so long that the younger guys probably thought he came with the furniture. Alongside Peter Clemenza, he held the position of Capo Regime, commanding one of the two original factions that made up the backbone of the entire family operation. We ain't talking about some middle management position here. We're talking about real power, real responsibility, the kind that gets men killed if they ain't careful. From the very first moment you see Tessio on screen, you understand something about him. This is a man who thinks before he speaks, who calculates every angle before he makes a move. Shrewd, that's the word. Calculating like a chess player who's already thinking 15 moves ahead while you're still trying to figure out where your pieces are. These qualities, they ain't just implied, they're demonstrated through everything the man does and every decision he makes throughout the entire story. Now here's where it gets interesting, where the roots of this whole tragedy start to take hold. Tessio and Vito, they met when they were young men, practically kids running around the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood of New York City back when that place was rougher than sandpaper and twice as dangerous. There's actually a scene that got cut from the picture, wound up on the editing room floor, that shows this exact moment when their paths first crossed. Real shame they didn't keep it in, because it tells you everything you need to know about how deep these connections ran. See, Tessio was different from Clemenza. Where Clemenza was loud and physical, a man who solved problems with his hands and his presence, Tessio was the quiet one, more reserved, you understand? More cunning, definitely more intelligent in that bookish kind of way, but he didn't have that raw physical strength that Clemenza carried around like a weapon. Each man had his uses, and the smart boss, he knows how to use each tool for the right job. It was Clemenza who put together this beautiful little operation selling stolen silk dresses, real quality merchandise that fell off trucks and into the hands of ladies who wanted to look nice without paying department store prices. Clemenza, he sees potential in young Vito and in Tessio, so he brings them into the business, cuts them in on the action, and wouldn't you know it, the scheme works like a charm. Money starts flowing, their names start carrying weight in the neighborhood, people start knowing who they are and showing respect. But here's the problem with success in that world. It attracts attention from the wrong kind of people. Enter Don Fanucci. And I use the term Don loosely here because this guy was more of a shakedown artist than a real man of respect. He walked around that neighborhood like he owned every cobblestone, extorting the Italian merchants, taking bread from the mouths of hardworking people who couldn't fight back. Fanucci was feared. I'll give him that much. When he came around with his hand out demanding a piece of those dress sales, commission, he called it, like he was some legitimate businessman, Clemenza and Tessio, they didn't want any part of confronting him. The fear of reprisals of what he might do to them and their families, it paralyzed them both. And this, right here, this is the moment that changed everything. When young Vito Corleone stood up, when he faced Fanucci alone and put that man in the ground, he didn't just eliminate a problem. He established himself as something different, something more. Clemenza and Tessio, they looked at this kid, this quiet guy who'd been following along, and suddenly they saw a leader. They saw someone worth following into whatever came next. That kind of respect, you can't buy it, you can't fake it, you got to earn it with blood. From that day forward, Vito started building something real. With Genco, Tessio, and Clemenza by his side, he constructed a criminal network that would eventually become legendary. Smart man that he was, he set up an olive oil import business as a front, something legitimate to hide behind, while the real money flowed through other channels. Clemenza and Tessio both received the title of Caporegime, with soldiers placed under their command, men who would answer to them, and through them, to the Don himself. Genco, he got appointed consigliere, the voice of reason at the right hand of power. But Vito, he was always thinking, always planning, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Even though both Clemenza and Tessio worked directly under his command, the Don made a deliberate choice to keep them separate. Tessio got Brooklyn, his own territory to run and manage. Clemenza took the Bronx. And here's the thing that shows you just how smart Vito really was. He didn't even want these two maintaining social relationships outside of business necessities. No Sunday dinners together, no friendly card games, nothing that might allow them to build the kind of bond that could threaten his position. Tessio, being the intelligent man that he was, he understood exactly what Vito was doing. He recognized that the Don was eliminating any possibility of his 2 most powerful Kappa regimes conspiring together against him. But Tessio also understood something deeper, that this wasn't about distrust or bad intentions. This was tactical thinking, pure and simple. This was a leader protecting his organization the way a father protects his children from dangers they might not even recognize. And Tessio respected that. He respected it for years and years. Now here's where the story takes its turn, where the seeds of what's coming start getting planted in soil that looked perfectly healthy from the outside. Through all those countless years, through all the ups and downs and dangers and triumphs, Tessio remained faithful to Vito Corleone like a devoted soldier should. The depth of that loyalty, you can measure it in one specific moment that tells you everything. When Vito got shot, when the bullets tore into him outside that fruit stand and the whole family went into crisis mode, it was Sonny who had to make the hard decisions fast. And who did Sonny turn to without hesitation? Tessio. He entrusted this man with the task of mobilizing 50 soldiers, 50 armed men, ready to protect both the hospital where Vito lay, between life and death, and the Corleone residence where the family waited and worried. Now you got to understand something here. Sonny, he had his suspicions about Clemenza during that dark time. There were questions, uncertainties, but Tessio, not even a shadow of doubt crossed Sonny's mind. If there had been even the smallest question about Tessio's reliability, never in a million years would he have been given such a crucial responsibility. But things, they have a way of changing when you least expect it. Everything shifted the day the old Don stood before his people and announced that he would be stepping back, retiring from active leadership, and placing the entire operation into the hands of young Michael. Michael, who'd been away at war, Michael who'd been going to college, trying to be legitimate, Michael who had seemed like he wanted nothing to do with the family business. This inexperienced kid was suddenly going to be calling all the shots. And from that moment forward, something started growing in Tessio's mind like a weed you can't pull out. He began to see things differently, to question things he'd never questioned before. In his analysis, cold and calculating as always, the Corleone family had lost its dominant strength. It was only a matter of time, he figured, before the other families sensed that weakness and moved in like sharks smelling blood in the water. And here's a detail that's going to make the hair stand up on the back of your neck if you're paying attention. At the end of that meeting, when everyone's saying their goodbyes, Tessio reaches out to shake Michael's hand, but he offers his left hand instead of his right, which anybody who knows anything about proper respect understands is wrong, it's backwards, it's a signal whether intentional or not. Michael hesitates just for a fraction of a second, just enough that you got to wonder if he caught it, if somewhere in that sharp mind of his, an alarm started going off. With Vito stepping away from power, Tessio convinced himself that Michael didn't have what it took. Not the instinct that keeps you alive in that world, not the coldness required to make the hard decisions, not the authority that commands respect from men who just as soon put a bullet in you as shake your hand. In Tessio's estimation, Michael was a lamb being led to slaughter, and anyone standing too close was going to get blood on their shoes. So when it came down to choosing sides, when the moment arrived to bet on a horse, Tessio looked at Michael and he looked at Barzini, and he chose Barzini. He convinced himself this was the smart play, the survival move, the decision that would keep him breathing when the dust settled. But in making that choice, in that precise instant of decision, Tessio committed the error that would destroy him. He forgot the one rule that a man in his position must never, ever break. You never doubt the dawn. Not ever. Not even in your own mind where you think nobody can hear you. The moment Vito Corleone's body was in the ground, Tessio wasted no time putting Barzini's strategy into motion. The man didn't even have the decency to wait until the funeral flowers wilted. Right there in the midst of the solemnities, while people were still crying and paying their respects, Tessio made his move. He approaches Michael, asks to speak privately, keeps his voice calm and reasonable, like he's discussing the weather or the price of olive oil. He proposes a peace meeting with Barzini, a sit-down to settle things once and for all, and the location, Brooklyn, his territory, his turf, a place where he assures Michael safety would be guaranteed, where nothing bad could possibly happen because Tessio himself would be there to make sure of it. But here's the beautiful, terrible irony of the whole thing. What Tessio didn't know, what he couldn't have known because he'd already stopped trusting the people he should have been trusting, was that the old Don had foreseen every single move on the board. Before death took him, Vito had mapped out exactly what would happen, who would flinch, who would fold, who would sell out when the pressure mounted. He knew someone would break. He just needed to know who. See, in the shadows, while everyone thought the Corleones were weak and vulnerable, Michael and Vito had been building something nobody knew about. A secret regime, a hidden force, under the command of Rocco Lampone, men who owed their loyalty only to the family and whose existence was known to almost no one. This was the real power move, the chess game within the chess game. In a world where betrayal is the currency everyone trades in, only Vito truly understood that real power isn't about reacting to your enemies. It's about anticipating them. It's about knowing what they're going to do before they even know themselves. And so we come to the end, to the moment when the bill comes due and a man has to pay for his choices. Tessio, completely unaware of what had transpired across the city while he was congratulating himself on his brilliant strategy, continues operating under the assumption that he'll be accompanying Michael to this meeting. He's probably already thinking about what comes after, about his new position in Barzini's organization, about how smart he was to make the right move at the right time. Then someone tells him the plans have changed. And in that instant, that single heartbeat of time, all of Tessio's experience, all of that cunning intelligence he'd cultivated over a lifetime, it kicks in and tells him everything he needs to know. The actor playing this part, he deserves every bit of praise he ever got, because what happens on his face in this scene is a masterclass in human emotion. You watch the realization dawn slowly, painfully, like watching the sun come up on the worst day of your life. His plan had failed. Everything he'd calculated, every assumption he'd made, it was all wrong. The gaze that crosses his face is a mixture of shame at what he'd become, resignation to what was coming, and a deep, profound sadness that comes from understanding you've destroyed yourself. He knew he'd been discovered. He knew exactly what was going to happen next. They take him away, Willie Chi-Chi's men, in a car that's driving toward a destination everybody understands but nobody speaks about. How exactly they ended Tessio, neither the film nor the book ever tells us. It's left to imagination, which is sometimes worse than knowing. And look, before you go running off to the comments, let me address something. There's this theory floating around that when Tom Hagen straightens his tie in that scene, it's supposed to be a signal about how Tessio died, some kind of coded message about strangulation or something. That's nonsense. Pure speculation with nothing behind it. But hey, if you've heard that theory, if you got thoughts about it, tell me in the comments. I'm curious what people think. Here's what's important to understand about all of this, the part that makes it a tragedy instead of just another mob hit. In Tessio's own mind, in the story he told himself to justify everything, he never betrayed Vito Corleone. His loyalty to the old Don remained pure and unbroken until the day Vito closed his eyes for the last time. The friendship they'd built over decades, starting from nothing in Hell's Kitchen, that bond stayed intact in Tessio's heart. But unlike Clemenza, who transferred his devotion seamlessly from father to son, Tessio couldn't make that leap. His loyalty to Vito, deep as it was, did not automatically extend to Michael. Maybe he couldn't see the father in the son. Maybe he'd already decided the son wasn't worthy of what the father had built. And the motivation behind it all, this is what really twists the knife. Tessio's betrayal wasn't born from greed. It wasn't about wanting more money or more power or more respect. No, what drove him to his destruction was fear. A quiet, gnawing fear that whispered to him in the dark hours, telling him the Corleones were finished, telling him he needed to save himself while there was still time. That silent terror led him to choose survival over loyalty, to pick self-preservation over honor. And this becomes crystal clear in the final scene where Tessio appears, when he looks at Tom Hagen, the man he's known for years, and says those words that everybody remembers. Tell Michael it was just business. If you remember the phrase that echoes throughout all three films, it's not personal, it's strictly business. Suddenly, Tessio's perspective comes into focus. He wasn't thinking of himself as a traitor. He was thinking of himself as a businessman making a rational decision in an uncertain market. That's how he justified it to himself, how he made peace with what he'd done. Understanding that makes Tessio a more tragic figure than a simple villain. In the end, his strategy failed because of one single miscalculation, one blind spot he never saw coming. He didn't believe in the strength of Michael Corleone. He looked at that young man and saw inexperience, saw weakness, saw someone who couldn't possibly fill his father's shoes. And that was the fatal error. There's a scene easy to overlook if you ain't paying attention, where Vito asks both Tessio and Clemenza directly if they trust his judgment. Clemenza, that beautiful, loyal soldier, he trusts without question, without hesitation, without even blinking. Tessio doesn't. Maybe it was the only time in all those years that Tessio failed to trust his Don completely. Maybe it was a moment of doubt that lasted only seconds. But that single moment of uncertainty, that tiny crack in the foundation of his faith, it sealed everything that came after. Before death took him, the old Don constructed a detailed and secret plan to restore the family's strength, to rebuild the power that others thought was crumbling. And part of that plan, maybe the most important part, was discovering who would be first to break, who would reveal themselves as the weak link that needed to be cut away. Now, if you want to know the full details of how Vito engineered that secret plan, all the layers and strategies he put in place while everyone thought he was just a dying old man, there's more to tell. Watch the video that's appearing on your screen right now, because there we lay out the whole story, every detail, every revelation. And if this world fascinates you, if The Godfather speaks to something deep in your soul, then do yourself a favor. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, because there's so much more to uncover about this trilogy, so many secrets still waiting in the shadows.